Hello, I'm Andrew Demetriou, Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Football League, but also a board member of the Climate Institute. And I'm joined today by Dr. Graham Pearman. Good afternoon, Graham.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, I started in climate change in 1971. We found that carbon dioxide concentrations over Australia were the same as over the Northern Hemisphere. We couldn't understand why. And then we found that in fact those people were finding increases of concentration. We set up a research program here in Melbourne and fairly quickly showed that the concentrations were increasing. And we knew from work that was done 100 years before that if the climate will change if you increase the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we had a problem on our hands.
So Graham, you're a fellow board member of the Climate Institute with me. Why all the fuss on carbon?
Well, carbon itself can be good or bad. It depends on which way you really look at it. In terms of climate change, we're talking about carbon that is in carbon dioxide, which is a heat-trapping gas, like some other greenhouse gases, methane and nitrous oxide. Carbon dioxide is emitted when oxygen and carbon are combined, and this can happen through respiration and decomposition of living organisms, or when humans actually combust carbon-containing fossil fuels like coal, oil and gas. We know that the rising emissions of carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation are altering the Earth's atmosphere and changing the global climate. As a result, a multitude of stakeholders are now looking very carefully at carbon and looking at it differently from before. Scientists, economists, companies, governments and communities. If we allow carbon emissions to continue to rise, the average global temperature will increase at a speed not seen since the end of the last ice age. And CSIRO recently has reminded us that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are higher today than any time for at least the last 800,000 years. With billions of people living on an already resource-constrained planet, a changing climate will put our farming, our food supplies, cities, coasts and communities at risk.
So Graham, people like me are concerned, but we also don't necessarily have the best handle on the science behind the carbon story, and probably we don't get to hear it in layman's terms. So can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Sure, Andrew. Carbon is the sixth most abundant element in the world and can be found in air, in the land and in oceans. Carbon is an important component of our own bodies, so carbon is not itself the problem. But when carbon unites with oxygen to form carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it has the property of trapping heat emitted from the Earth, making the Earth warmer than it otherwise would be. Scientists have known for 150 years that the level of this gas in the atmosphere is important in determining the temperature of the planet and its livability. Without the heat-trapping properties of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, the Earth would be frozen. By changing this level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we risk impacts on our way of life and that of the millions of species with which we share the planet. Excess carbon pollution is upsetting that natural balance.
So how do we get to this point?
Well, when we burn fossil fuels, we release carbon that was captured by photosynthesizing plants. When we burn fossil fuels, we release carbon that was captured by photosynthesizing plants and locked away for millions of years, putting it back into the carbon cycle as carbon dioxide. Oceans and forests have soaked up lots of this extra carbon. They act as sinks for the gas, but these sinks have their limits. In essence, the carbon cycle is now out of balance. There is too much carbon dioxide being put into the atmosphere, and these sinks are too ineffective. Excess greenhouse gases are known now to be the main cause of global warming, and we have observed this since the Industrial Revolution.
So Graham, where do we go from here? Is there anything we can do? And if so, who's responsible?
Yes, there's much that we can do, but the time for action is now, and the window of opportunity is closing fast. The international community has set a goal to stabilise concentrations of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere at levels that will keep global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. This means peaking global carbon pollution by before 2020 and moving quickly to a low carbon or zero carbon economies. If we are serious about this goal, it means that no more than about 20% of known fossil fuel reserves can be burnt, at least in the way we do it today. Just like house price bubbles, we have a carbon bubble with potentially unsaleable carbon assets on the books of our companies, and most likely in your and my superannuation funds. So we have to budget our carbon.
So if we have a carbon budget, who has the right to use it?
Of course, this is not a scientific question, but one of ethics. Is it fair for rich nations to expect less developed nations to curtail their carbon emissions when they themselves have benefited significantly from being able to pollute without hindrance in the past? Developed countries like Australia have contributed over 70% to the build-up of carbon pollution in the atmosphere. Does that make Australia responsible for leading emissions reductions, even if it is that China and India will release more carbon today as they climb the ladder of development? An individual person in Kiribati, a small island country in the Pacific, produces around 1/16 the amount of carbon dioxide compared with the global average. An Australian or an American produces 64 times that amount. An Australian on average produces 3 times more carbon dioxide than the average person in China. Ultimately, a fair distribution of global carbon budget is what we should be aiming for, but at the same time reducing total emissions in order to meet the 2-degree target.
So we need to do this fairly, and it sounds like we need to create a new low and then zero carbon prosperity. In the high carbon economy, carbon emissions have been coupled to economic growth, whilst future generations and the environment are largely excluded from the equation. The pursuit of short-term growth at any cost is neither sustainable nor fair. We need to factor in the finite nature of our natural resources and the real cost of carbon pollution. When we first started to use fossil fuels in the pursuit of prosperity, we weren't aware that their benefits came at a high price. Now the science is clear. A high carbon economy is also a high risk one. We need to take costs and risks of carbon into full account, embedding them into business, political and community decision making. A price and limit on carbon is one important step in the recalibration of our economics and the environment. It makes big polluters accountable and consumers more aware of their consumption. It provides business with a powerful incentive to rethink their strategies and drives innovation and competitions towards a smarter, cleaner and healthier prosperity. Backed by supporting policies and incentives, a price and limit on pollution will play a big part in the shift to a low carbon economy.
Yes, but a low carbon future will not be achieved by a few clever brains alone. It takes people, businesses and governments to work towards the same goals. There are good examples of where working together has made a difference. Thinking back to the 1980s when chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs were discovered to be dangerous to the ozone layer, CFC bans required collective action and successively demonstrated that our resolve and capacity for change, once mobilised, can be swift and effective. Just as in the case for CFCs, as the threat of unrestrained carbon is becoming more widely recognised, we need actions and constraints. While the carbon challenge is more difficult, the CFC experience reminds us that collective determination can drive significant political, economic and behavioural change. So the changes needed to transition to a low carbon economy and society will occur on many fronts.
Global businesses like GE, KPMG and BHP recognise the future economy will be carbon constrained. So we need new tests for a new prosperity like carbon competitiveness and carbon productivity. But if we're going to keep global warming within the guardrails recommended by scientists like Graham, then companies, countries and communities are going to need to cooperate better and move with more urgency. Most importantly, we all need to understand carbon better. The Climate Institute's new Carbon Book is a great starting point for everyone trying to understand carbon jargon and the challenge ahead. In its most enduring and perhaps unexpected form, carbon exhibits an unparalleled intensity of both strength and clarity. Under extreme pressure and heat, carbon can transform into a diamond. Rising to meet the climate change challenge may well be rough going, perhaps more so politically and culturally than technically. But it will also reveal our best qualities, the determination, resilience and clarity of vision that can capture both the intellect and the imagination. It may just be our shining moment.